A warm welcome to Lost for Words, a podcast sharing the opinions, glories, and stories of guests. I am your host Jason, and this week I am joined by a comrade, Gavin Brewis, to discuss socialism and modern day politics and society. Gavin is a former member of the armed forces, having joined being a young adult who was in trouble with the law. After leaving the army, Gavin went back into education and is about to embark upon a PhD. Gavin discusses how getting back into education led him to engage with the literature of the likes of Karl Marx and how he has never looked back. This one runs a little longer than other episodes, but we do cover a lot of ground and go into deep detail about socialism past, present and future. I will speak to you on the other side. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. Please leave a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, Podbean or any other platform. It's the best way the podcast can grow and better content can be produced for you, the listener. It's your listening experience that matters the most. But enough from me, now on to today's episode of Lost for Words. All the stories start at the beginning, so tell me what part of Glasgow or where you grew up?
So I grew up in different areas of Glasgow, due to being moved about with my mum, between my gran and other things as well. So earlier days I was in South Hill, and then I was in Moss Park, then Moss Heights, and it was there I started Moss Heights is where I started getting into sort of gang fighting and all that stuff. And then I was up Knightswood in Kingsway Court. This is when I was back with my mum again, and that was like the first time I'd met refugees and stuff like that, because we'd been living in temporary accommodation up there because we'd been obviously homeless. So up there it was like homeless temporary accommodation for refugees and stuff like that as well. So first time I'd met anybody from places like Iraq, and obviously being quite young, that's quite a big story to hear, but so you can only imagine how bad it was for the people who'd actually lived there, you know.
And how would you describe your own upbringing then? Would you say you were someone that was into the gangland fighting, or was it something that kind of reeled you in rather than you being attracted to it as a youngster?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's just more about where you hung about. So in Moss Park there was gang fighting, and then I'd hung about with boys from Moss Park, and then I was been doing Ibrox way, and then pals in Govan, and then I'd stayed up with Moss Heights and just fight with Pollock and stuff like that there. So it's more, it wasn't so much that you got reeled into it in a sense. It was just it was that normalised. It was just something you done, you know what I mean? If there was during the week you would play football or something like that with your pals, and then at the weekend you would go for a scrap. That was like the normal thing to do. It's a done thing.
Would you describe yourself as being thoroughly, deeply working class then, as a youth?
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing about this. Somebody said this is to before, and I think Marx would have probably described us as the lumpen proletariat, because we were obviously the lowest of the low. We were the Ned, scheme wins, and there are a lot of working class people who never seen or experienced stuff we did. I mean, we were growing up in environments where the police kicking your door in, your mother lying there facing the bevy, your dad's full of drugs, and people, your pals get slashed and stabbed and things like that. So obviously we were obviously the lowest of the low, as I say. That's what our class is. That's what we're called Neds after all. And I don't think you can get any more working class, as I say, but I don't think that in terms of the Marxist definition, we'd probably be, as I say, a lumpen proletariat, because they didn't see us with much revolutionary potential, no being very political at that age either.
And then you take away the Marxist stuff, like Ned as non-educated delinquent, that probably does apply to people of that ilk, as you say, in your background as well, having been expelled from school. So you could have even said that would apply to you, and funny how you turn it all around in later life. But I'll move on to that then, the school element. So you were expelled twice, two different schools, is that right?
Yeah, I different schools I got expelled, so I was suspended plenty of times in both of them, then I get both of them.
So your expulsion, the first one, what was that for?
To be honest, the first incident was at Bellahouston Academy. I'd been suspended like loads of times for different things, like just being cheeky with teachers, and I was constantly fighting. I don't know what it was when I was younger. Just used to have this massive urge just to fight with everybody, and part of that obviously was through the gangs and stuff like that as well. So I went to school and I was seen as like a boy from Moss Heights and hanging about with boys Fibrooks and that as well. And we used to fit Kinnan Park, and it was Fairhouston was kind of like mainly Kinnan Park boys who went there. So we're always fighting. This time it was unrelated though. It was just a boy I'd been fighting with, and then having a square go with him, but he started kicking me in the head. So yeah, I took my belt off and I hit him with my belt, and he burst open. So that was that first one. I got expelled for, and then I went to. It took me a couple of months to actually get into Lourdes. I had to go through like whole process of different stuff before the school would let me in, and then children's panels and that as well because of my behaviour at the time. And I went to Lourdes, and I was there for it wasn't even a year. I think I was there for 9 months. And again, I was just fighting with everybody because the boys who were in Lourdes were mostly Pollock boys, but a lot of the Pollock boys, the older ones, used to wait outside the school for us going into school. So we'd be fighting outside the school and go back into the school and start fighting with other boys as well. And this this time, my cousin had been gone with one of them, and the boy had been bullying her and going about the school and saying she's a slag and all that stuff. So being a wee guy and trying to defend your cousin's honour, you know what I mean? So I ended up batting that boy, and then I didn't actually know this, but at the break time after I'd battered him, because I'd got buckled for batting him first, but then my pals got hold of him at the break as well, and they battered him again, like gave him a severe down. I got the blame for that, but I was not I was nothing to do with it. They just done it because I just want to obviously stick up for me as well. So that was the second one. As I said, I think I'd been in a fight like a few days before it, and they told me it because it wasn't that serious. The first one, it was just like a wee skirmish. And they said to me, "Look, if you don't start playing ball, you're going to end up getting kicked out again." So that was it. I didn't even get a chance in that one. I never even got a chance to get suspended in the second school. It was just a case of that's you're fighting again, so you're out, and then that was it. No schools would take us in. I had to I applied to go to Gavin High, didn't accept me. Ross Hall didn't accept me, and that was pretty much it.
How old were you by the time you'd been expelled twice? So after that second one and no one else would take you in, what year would you have been in?
14 I was. So
That's mad.
the
Third year, fourth year?
fourth year, I think it was it third year, fourth year? Well, basically, I was the time I done my prelims. I was 15. It was because I must have been 14 and I done my prelims and I was 15 because that was at Christmas.
Yeah,
And
fourth year Christmas.
and then I turned 15 in November, and then I done my prelims, so I got kicked out, and then they sent me a letter and says, "Look, you can come and do your prelims in this school because I've not got another school to go to." And this is a funny one because I rocked up in my Spain trackie after I'd been kicked out, and they're like, "Where's your uniform?" I was like, "Well, I don't go to this school anymore. What am I going to be wearing the uniform for?" And so I got sent up the road for that. I couldn't do that prelim. I had to come in and wear wear something better the next day as well. So that was just another wee stupid things I added up.
So you're 15, you've been expelled twice. Where does your life go from there? What did you want to do?
At that point, I mean, what did I end up doing, or what did I want to do at that point?
Go, what did you want to do first, then what did you end up doing can come after?
To be honest with you, I didn't really think much in the future at that age at 15 and stuff like that. We were a good few of us were already like selling pills and stuff like that as well, and we seen a lot of the older boys make quite a fair bit of money, selling drugs and that, and they had brand new motors and belters of watches and big chains and big bracelets and stuff like that. You're seeing them and you're thinking, I could just do that, you know what I mean? So it was a kind of, it was a weird one for me because when I was in school, I always wanted to do something good in school. I think my first and second and even third year before I started getting kicked out and stuff like that and found myself in my bother, I always said to myself, yeah, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I used to say that to people and they'd laugh at us, but I think that doesn't help either right enough.
You hear that quite a lot though in terms of say schools that are in either deprived areas or non typically high attaining students. When they aim high, it's always kind of laughed down. I think that's a very dangerous. It's a very dangerous precedent. That's a bad environment because you want to try and egg people on rather than you want to push them up rather than pull them down. It's a weird. You hear that it's a very Scottish thing almost because it seems to happen quite a lot.
I found that as well. I mean, when I did get kicked out, part of the reason why I did feel so worthless and shallow at that point is because it'd been drilled into us that I was stupid, you know what I mean? When I got kicked out of Bella, I was in Bella Houston, and before I left Bella, I was in like the top English class, I was in the top PE class, and I was in top quite a few of my classes. But then I went to Lourdes after being expelled, and they put me right into foundation classes, as if to say that you've been in trouble, so you're obviously
You're obviously silly.
aye. So when I'd went in, I'd say to them, look, this is too easy for me. And I'd done a test. I remember it. They gave us like some assessment or something. And then they ended up putting put up classes for English, but they kept me doing for all the other ones. So I think part of my rejection of like education and stuff like that and the way my attitude was when I went to Lords was kind of based on that as well, because I felt as if like these people are think they know me just because I've been fighting, because that's pretty much what I was in trouble for all the time, just with people. And as I say, it was kind of a lot of it was obviously a chip on my shoulder coming for pretty much nothing, and also try to impress people and try to prove to people you're worth something, but you're obviously trying to impress the young people, try to say like I'm a hard man rather than going, look, I'm quite bright, I can do quite well in school.
What you were saying about the looking up and aspiring to the older drug dealers who've got the nice cars, watches, chains. Where are those people now?
Uh, Actually, I mean, I'm pals with a couple of them, and a lot of them end up just going into like normal jobs and things like that. One of my pals now, he owns a scaffolding company, but he actually he didn't just buy a scaffolding company with drug money. He'd been in the jail, and then he'd got out and started working the scaffolding, saved up his money, and just started his own business through doing it. Now he actually employs quite a few of my other pals who were back in the day doing all that stuff. So I think it took a lot of different life lessons for different people and different ways of learning to actually go, well, I need to screw the heat here. And there is some of my pals though for that period where I can't even really risk talking to them, because when I'm trying to go in my life now, we try to do things both like academically but also in a sense I try to unite people in a sort of political stance as well. A lot of my pals are still stuck in that era where they think in terms of schemes, people coming from different areas, and that's their mindset. So obviously, I can't involve myself in any of that rubbish.
Went from there to eventually the army. Is there anything that happened in between? What was the story from you left school up to joining the army?
So when I left school, must have had about 4 or 5 jobs. So I worked in the potato scone factory, which was random. That was like some guys who'd my granddad known, and they were opening up this big potato scone factory. Still remember how to make them as well for it. And then my uncle, he's a manager in a shop, Jackson Taylor's in the town, and I got a job with him for a while. Then I turned 16, I was working in Quick Save, and then I, when I was 16, I remember I was doing night shifts and stuff like that. Only 16, I don't even know if it was legal. I was only getting paid a 16-year-old's wage for grafting off through the night up in this Quick Save. I think it was in Castlemilk or something like that. But the boy I'd worked with in Cardonald, where my local place where I was working, he'd drive us up. That was weird. And then I ended up being a workies mate in the air conditioning, in the fitting for that. And then after that, because that was just like a temporary thing, ended up in one of these sort of like RRW courses. RRW, I think it's something to do with another name was sort of like get ready for work course, but we call this is quite ableist here. What we used to say, but it was just normalised back then. So we used to say it was retards reading and writing, RRW. And the thing is, that's the way we seen ourselves at that point. We just seen ourselves as we were these Neds. We were just scumbags in society. So it was all just a laugh to us. We'd get, instead of getting your 60 quid, it was a fortnight or 80 quid a fortnight, you'd get 60 quid a week for going to these things. So you get extra money for it. And as I say, that was just obviously, as I say, the language is quite wrong as well, but that's the way we seen it, and that's what we used to say back then. And I think it just goes to show where our minds were at that stage as well, because we had been totally pushed down and drilled into this idea that we're all stupid and we can't find work and we can't get jobs. We just kind of accepted that, like, aye, whatever. So that was that.
And then army, how old were you when you did that to begin with?
17, I joined it, 17, 18. Can't remember the exact age. It was in 2006 I went and joined. So.
And you tell me about your experience with them. How would you summarise it, describe it in your own words?
To be honest, I mean, when I was in, it didn't really faze me when I was in. I mean, different reasons I had for joining, but when I was in, I just kind of seen it as, for the first few years anyway, I was just like following along with it. I was just, the training and stuff like that is supposed to obviously grind you down and totally demoralise you, because the idea is that they grind you so far into the ground that you're feeling worthless and then build you up again. What I found is when we joined, the majority of us felt fucking worthless anyway. So when they were trying to do all this stuff to us to try and harden us up or try to break our spirit, there was a couple of me and a couple of other boys who were for the schemes, because there was boys for Castlemilk and boys for Farm up there, Dino and Hammy, and me and Hammy especially, we were just for a carry on. No matter what the fun is, we were just always taking the piss anyway. We ended up getting split platoons because we were taking the piss that much. So once we were actually in the army after training and all that, yeah, it's just seen it as like a kind of big a boys' club sort of thing. It was a totally weird institution, because they did drill into this idea that it's your brothers and you look after them, and they give this sort of family vibe and this idea that you're all part of something great. But the vast majority of people that are in absolutely hate it. I think after you're in for a couple of years and then novelty wears off and everybody hates it, because you're starting to realise by that point you're just getting fucked about. And obviously once you leave, you have a even different perspective, because you've left the place and you can see the outside rather than being institutionalised within it. So it's hard to describe what you feel when you're in the place. You feel kind of protected, but you also know you're no, because they're not looking after you in the same sense.
Now that you're on the outside, then looking in, having also been on the inside looking out, what would you say is the biggest misconception that maybe the public have about being a soldier versus the reality?
Probably the idea that the army and the soldiers and stuff like that are these big scary men, with uniforms and rifles. The fact is that the vast majority of people are in, unless you're an officer, it's all boys and lasses taken straight off the schemes, the poorest of the poor. As I say, when I joined, I was the perfect target audience. I mean, I was a prime candidate for them. I had no qualifications. Had a tag on in that just before I joined. I was up at court ready to put away, but I got a deferred sentence. So all these things that felt as if I had no other choice. The army gave me that choice, or so that was the idea. But there was everybody that I speak to, the majority of people who were in, were also in that same position. So I think that this idea that there's this big thing about people saying, "Oh, still got the choice to go in and kill people." It's a a total narrow-minded view, because it takes away the sort of material conditions which actually lead you to that position in the first place, which is obviously extreme poverty, the idea that you're never going to make it in yourself otherwise, and then they come along selling you hopes and dreams. And I remember one of the guys had said to us before we joined, and he says, the chance of you ever going to war's like a million to one. We'll never go anywhere. We never go anywhere in this British Army. All you'll do is just sit and you'll get ready to go, but you'll never go. And then obviously we knew that wasn't the case for Iraq and then Afghanistan as well. But in general, as I say, the misconception I would say is the idea that one, that it's big scary guys in the army, and two, that this idea that it's a simplistic choice where you're just going in to kill people, rather than the idea that you're actually got a sense of escapism. And one of the things I'm going to be covering in my research actually is the notion that when I joined up, Glasgow was the murder capital of Europe at this point, and that was a UN report. And at that point in Glasgow, you're more likely to die in the schemes of Glasgow as a young working class boy than you were in the British Army. So when people say that, really you were joining the army to actually maybe save your life in the same way. You know what I mean? Not just saving it in the sense of not getting stabbed or murdered, saving it as well in the terms of you might actually be able to do something in your life and actually get a job for a change, and people not judging you just based on how you look and things like that, especially if you're no class conscious, if you've not got a family who's socialist behind you or anything like that to tell you otherwise.
I agree with that completely, because I'm not an army lover or anything, but I haven't done modern studies. I remember when we did, you do a lot about sort of Great Britain, and there was a point, I don't know if it's still the case now, but the life expectancy for men in some areas of Glasgow was lower than what it was in Baghdad. Now, it was definitely Baghdad was the reference point, because, as you say, people that would stave people away from applying for the army because, you might get killed. But you're also likelier to get killed. You're likelier to die earlier in some parts of Glasgow than you are if you go to a war zone. And I think it's this point. What is it you're trying to save people from? That you might die here, and you're going to get yourself into hang about the wrong crowd. It's going to end your life earlier than going off to fight in a literal war zone. And I'm glad now that it doesn't seem to be the case, and that we have seen to have upped life expectancy, but there's still a long way to go for lots of parts of certainly Glasgow anyway.
For me, that is the big one, because I remember that at 15, I'd been hit with a sword, stabbed in the leg. My pal had been slashed. Two of my pals had been murdered. And one of my other pals stabbed with a mad dog bolt there in the temple. I remember walking up and seeing all the blood spurting out. And as I say, I was up at court and things like that as well at this point, and I had a tag on for 3 months. And then I was to go up at court again. And then when I went up, the lawyer says to him, look, he's got to join the army. And he says, right, we'll give you a deferred sentence. And then he says, if I see you back up here again, I'll call you up for the case you're up for. Then I'll backtrack all your other stuff and do you with that as well. So I remember thinking to myself, I could stay here and die, or I can go away and die for something worth something. Because back then my mindset was that the army would make me look as if I was worth something, rather than being this wee thug on the street. So, and the funny thing is, it was my pal's idea to join up, my pal Brun. He's been the one that was trying to encourage me to join. He ended up not joining himself because his family spoke him into it. But I never really had that background to tell me otherwise. So that was the only difference.
Looking back then, if there was to be someone who was 16, 17 and came to you and said, Gavin, should I join? What would you say to them?
Definitely no. On the basis that, as I say, a lot of the people who are maybe leaving school, they feel as if they didn't do well in school, so they feel like they're not going to have any other opportunities doing anything else. But in actual fact, it's all just really just about finding what you're good at as an individual. And by finding that, then you can obviously excel in your own sort of field. So you might somebody who's really good at technical work, practical work, rather than reading and writing. Or you might get somebody who's really good at reading and writing, but who just didn't enjoy the subject at school. So I also think it's when you go past school and things like that, there's a lot more areas for free thinking. That's what I kind of enjoyed college and uni and stuff like that in comparison to school. It's a lot more open and you can put your own ideas out there, for your own experiences, which for ages obviously were ignored working class. But I think if somebody says to me, should they join, I would definitely say no, because there's obviously different routes, be it going back to college and finding something you like, or even just a normal job, because in terms of like the schools and things like that offer now as well, they're telling you to do degrees and you're just getting normal jobs and things like that by the end of them now. I mean, I don't know if it's been I don't know if that's been like sort of the point what they've been trying to achieve, just to try and do away with sort of academic working class, because it seems to have to be, it's kind of fell once the working class started coming into it. But I would say don't join, because it's not worth your life, not worth risking your life for anybody, especially people who don't give two shits about you and you're just a number.
And you're now, so after you left, you went back to start studying. So that's the path you took. Once you're saying you realised and you would say these things to someone who was considering joining, you went back to study. What was your thinking behind doing that?
Well, actually, after I'd been in the army, I lived in Norway for 2 years. And when I was in Norway, that's started reading more. And through I met this a lassie who's a Polish lassie, Karolina, who's my ex now. But started talking to her, and she was the one that got me into reading Marx. And she was an anarchist, so she was trying to get me to read Kropotkin, but I didn't really like that. But it gave me, it sort of spurred my interest in it. And then I started reading Marx and started reading more Chomsky as well. She told me to read, and Naomi Klein. And I think that once I started reading that and looking at my own situation and my own background, that's kind of spurred me on. So first I used to wind it up for it, but at first I would be like, what's this shite? And eventually, I think once you read it and you start getting into it, and you start realising actually these people are talking to me. And it's the first time that I felt in my life that I was reading something and it was actually talking to me. As a working class person, is somebody. At that point, I didn't even think of myself in terms of working class. I didn't ever think to myself, you. I knew there was obviously rich people, and I knew there was poor people, and I knew I was a poor person. But I didn't think it in terms of class structures and class systems and how I was oppressed. I sort of believed at one point as well that the sort of American dream, that if you work hard, you can become all you want to be and all that stuff. And I think that was maybe drilled into us in the army as well, through this sort of idea, progression, things like that. So once I read that, then I came back up the road and I'd done my scaffolding course and I'd done the offshore rigs course. But my wee granny was not that well at this point. And then I started working in Scottish Power, just as to try and tide us by until I got offshore. But as I say, my wee granny was not doing that well at that point. She had emphysema and she started getting quite unwell. So I was thinking to myself, like, do I want to go away, or do I just stay here just in case anything happens to her? And then I remember thinking myself as well at this point, I was saying, like, I've done, in Norway, I was making really good money at that point. I remember thinking to myself, is this it? Is this? And I think it was obviously influenced by the book that I was reading as well. And I was just thinking, surely there's more to life than this, just me chasing this goal to get more money, and then just that's it, get old and die. I thought I was just trying to think about all the people that had been in my position who'd maybe got good jobs and maybe made it as far as where I'd made it at that point, because I was dating out right at that point. And then I decided, after talking to my pa and work, Aaron, he just finished his degree he'd done psychology in the University of Western Scotland. He'd went to City of Glasgow first and spoke to me about, obviously quite political by this point, so I was talking about politics, and it was all kind of new to me. I'd only been into it for a couple of years at that point. So I'd always be talking to him about politics, society, and the sort of ways of dealing with it. And he says, look, you're really into this. How did you never do it as a sort of course at college or uni? And then I told him about, obviously I'd not had any quals in it. And he says, you can still do it at that age, And I was like, I'll see. So I thought about it, and then he helped me with my application. And I ended up going to Glasgow College, and that's it, just there.
What did you study at City of Glasgow, and then what did it lead you to studying at uni?
Well, social sciences I studied at City of Glasgow. I need to say, every single thing I do, I always thank Jim O'Donovan for a chance, because when I'd applied for the other colleges, I'd applied for an NC, which is obviously the lowest one after you do your high school work, and I got knocked back for all these different places like NC, HNC, and then I applied for Glasgow to do the HND, and that was the one I got an interview on. I met Jim, and he says, "You've got no formal qualifications, have you?" And I was like, just waiting for him just to say, "No, that's it." And I was just like, "No." And he's like, "All right." He says, "Your team's really good, so is that you done that?" I says, "Aye, it was me done it." And he says, "All right, we'll give you a chance in." So from then on, I says I was just going to do my best. So I've done social sciences there, and I think because I was a wee bit older and I'd been through everything I'd been through, made me a wee bit more focused, rather than there was a lot of people going out quite a lot during the week and stuff like that. Whereas I was telling myself, "No, this is what you want to do, stick to it." So I sacrificed quite a lot, obviously, like social life and things like that, just to try and do better. And then the end of that, I won the Principal's Prize for Excellence, so it was like the top student sort of award. And then I'd applied for social sciences in GCU. So after I'd got my grades for college, they were saying is you can apply here, here, and here. And GCU was the sort of one that appealed to me most, purely on the basis that GCU is still an esteemed college, but it's still an esteemed uni. People still said it was a hard one to get into. For all grades, we needed to get an AAB minimum to get into GCU. So it's quite high compared to the people that are already at GCU. They were telling me that they had no real, in the first and second year, they had no real motivations to do well or anything like that. They just had to pass, sort of thing. So when I'd applied for that, and then Strathclyde were going to take us into second year, and West of Scotland as well. But I got the West of Scotland and GCU. I'd went to GCU because at that point, because of my grades, I'd done well, so they were pretty much had a good choice of where I could go. I just felt GCU was best. So I done social sciences there, and then narrowed it down to history eventually, because that's the subject I've found most interesting, and also I felt I was a wee bit better at history as well. I don't know if it's maybe just because I was reading quite a lot of history years ago, or just more interesting. I just found myself attached to that.
And you won the best history dissertation. What was your dissertation about?
My title of my dissertation in that year was how far and or why and how far did the British political elite support the ideas of fascism in the interwar period. So I was looking at ideological reasons for it. Basically what I'd done was I broke down the ideas of fascism as the components of that, and rather than saying that British political elite in the interwar period were fascist, which is, it would be they were close to fascism, but they weren't complete fascists because they believed in obviously their own ideology, which was conservatism. But it was was very close. So basically I broke down the ideas of fascism, the sort of ultranationalism, anti-rationalism and elitism, social Darwinism and all that stuff, and applied it to these figures in the interwar period, Churchill and other famous sort of figures in that point, and then just said, gave them background as well, so looked at their education and what they were taught and how they were taught and all these different things about sort of the white race and elitism. And so basically there was a lot of parallels, and I draw a lot of parallels to Nazi Germany and how they were educated and how the media used a lot of the media went and told a lot of the same stuff that they did in Britain as they did in Germany, but just Britain did it like 20 years earlier or something like that. It was kind of more socially acceptable at that point, and then obviously in Germany, once the Nazis came to power, it was kind of swept under the rug.
So, going from there, then applied for the studentship for the PhD. Tell me about that. So, like the process, the interview, applying, that type of thing.
So, the PhD progress studentship. So, because I was doing a masters at this point as well, it was like I was still doing my research, and yeah, mega busy time at this point. Actually, it was, and that was, I think it was in like March or something like that when it all started. The first ones were like Christmas, and I was going to apply then, but I never really. I was speaking to my lecturers at Strathclyde about it, and they're saying just wait until summer and do it, you'll be able to do it better then. And I was like, right, fine. So I'd left it, and then one of my lecturers for GCU contacted me, and she says, look, there's studentships going on now, you're not going to apply. So I'd missed the one to apply for. I think it was the Wellcome Trust one. My research would have been good for it. And then I think it was March time I was doing about that, and I started applying for the other ones. Well, February probably. And at this point, obviously, I was doing my master's work. I was applying for this research, so I had to write a research proposal first, which I think was 1,500 words, and then I had to do my methods, my framework, and all that stuff is all part of it. Secondary reading, and so all that stuff, and then I'd applied. And then once I got accepted, I had to do the interview, which was basically them just asking me what my topic is, which my framework was, the methods I'm going to use. It was basically a 5-minute interview. A 5-minute presentation, and then they just ask you loads of questions, what you're doing, just try to find out more about it. Because obviously it's quite competitive when you get to that stage. I was only, I think, was in like 6 places or something in the whole of Scotland for this particular one. I think anybody could apply actually, but so it was a grim time at that point as well, because that was, as I said, it was March. I had died at that point as well, so we're trying to fit all that, my masters in, the PhD thing, and then try to deal with my granny passing. So it was a quite shite all that, and then that's it. So basically, once I'd applied for that, I just had to wait a few weeks, but I think I'd done well in the interview. I spoke clearly. I gave a good presentation because I believed in what my research was in, and what my objectives are. And I think when that's half the battle, if you actually believe in what you're saying and you're hoping that the research is actually going to do some good for people, rather than just doing research for research's sake.
What will your research be, and when does it begin?
My research is on. I'll give you the title. So it's a history of the history of emotions and trauma in the murder capital of Europe, and then it's a new history of Neds and Ned culture between 1995 to 2006. So the idea is that because I've obviously grew in that environment and that background, what I've described on this podcast, my whole idea is that there's a lot of people who would have been involved in these gangs and this gang culture, and who I see now as being anxious, depressed, heavy bad in the drink, the drugs, and to me, that you're a young boy and a young boy and a young lassie, and you're seeing people getting slashed and stabbed and murdered, and as I say, police kicking your door in and stuff like that. It's going to have some kind of effect on your mind. And I'm trying to look at potential trauma for individuals who'd been part of that culture where we grew up, and also the impact that it's had today. So it's historical, but it's also quite sociological as well. And I know there's a criminology researcher going to be involved in it as well. One of the sort of supervisors who's came in. And also what I'm looking at, I'm sort of challenging this sort of Ned stereotype as well. And the fact that when people think of Ned, I've seen loads of people writing it saying it's like the white trash of Glasgow, who they have the white trash in America. We were the white trash of Glasgow. But in reality, I mean, there was people from different ethnic groups. There was lassies involved in this as well. So the idea that it's just a young white male thing is, for the majority it was, but there was a lot of people who weren't like white males. So I think it's about trying to give representation to a lot of people who might be also suffering for that culture, who have been massively overlooked because it's just been popular just to talk about the main sort of like primary group. But a couple of examples are like in Port Shields there was well no sorry at Cessnock there was the PR boys. This is a full gang of people, Asian boys who were involved in this sort of like Ned culture, but nobody's ever spoke about them. And I think the reason I know these kind of things is because I grew up in that culture, so I've got a kind of insider outsider perspective. And using my inexperiences and be able to talk to people firsthand and stuff like that, I'm hoping that it's going to help a few people.
That be a 3-year masters or a 2? A
No,
PhD, sorry, a 3-year PhD.
3 years, 3 years research. It's all paid, so I get funded for all the stuff that I'm doing in it. So if it means that I need to travel, you get all your expenses done for you, and also you get basically it's like a small wage you get for just in the work.
Good, right. Look forward to seeing where that goes as well for the next 3 years. Right, we'll move on to now to the socialism aspect. I'm looking forward to this because I can't pretend to be someone that engages deeply with the critical literature. So I'll just kind of, if I play devil's advocate for things, just put across questions and then you can educate me and anyone listening. So firstly, how do you define socialism?
I mean, obviously there's a stereotypical definition, which is sort of the abolition of private property, wealth distribution, and an end to capitalism. But for me personally, the reason why I champion socialism is on the basis of equality. And I think in this system that champions individualism, capitalism, and to exploit and capitalise on other people, I think it's quite an oxymoron that people can suggest equality can never be achieved in this system. So I say that's to me, it's socialism and equality.
And is that why you're a socialist? That you believe deeply and thoroughly in the principle of equality?
I mean that's pretty much it. I'm socialist because I believe in this equality and I believe in unity. I believe that every person, no matter their background or colour or creed, has a right to a fair life and a life worth living, especially when the amount of money that's going about today. I think it's ridiculous that people starving when there's other people who have got enough money to burn.
There's the group like the certain families that have, I think, maybe the slight majority of all the wealth on earth, and it's definitely less than 20 people that it's shared between.
That's ridiculous. Frightening. But so long as we've got people who are arguing the case for billionaires because they believe in what, as I say, I used to believe at one point that anybody can achieve, and this sort of American dream idea, that anybody can just work hard and you'll be rich, when the reality is if you work hard you'll make your boss rich.
Yes. When did you first become aware of like the deep principles of socialism? Was it when you were saying your former partner made you engage with sort of the Marxism and the Trotsky type literature?
I mean, that was a socialist before college, for reading sort of Marx, and as I say, for Carolina initially telling me about these sort of books, and then I went on to sort of tougher stuff during, well, just in the summer, just before college. I'd actually started reading sort of Capital and German ideology. I had to read them a couple of times actually at that point, because some of the terminology in it to me was absolutely baffling. But I think the more you read them, the more you become used to it, and also the more you're in amongst these kind of circles, then they start becoming more apparent as well. But but even now, I mean, I wouldn't say I sit and read Marx just for the sake of reading a novel. I tend to read Marx as a sort of a manual or a guideline. If I've got any questions, I need to ask myself about directions and any thoughts that I've got that are ongoing. I sort of use it as a manual to see how we can progress forward with it. If there's any issues that come up, and see if it's been discussed before. Then obviously, if it's not been discussed before, take it forward and discuss it with other people and see what they're on it.
How does socialism fit in or fail to fit in with the class system that's in place? Say in the UK, for example, you've got middle class, working class, even say high class, and then the extreme poverty at the bottom. Where does socialism fit in with that?
Well, I mean, socialism is obviously in direct opposition to the existing class system. Under the capitalist system, like I say, can by definition have socialism. So no matter what they call these sort of like models of the third way or neoliberalism, or diet capitalism, so long as the classic system exists, there's inequality. And as I say, for me, socialism is about equality. So I feel though that the class system, the class lines have always been blurred to some extent, and this as well.
I agree. I was going to ask you that. Do you think the lines are blurred? Because I think, for example, the example I would like to use is that where does poor become working class, then working class become middle class? And if you've grown up working class, at what point do you ascend into this? Do you know what I mean?
This is one that actually comes up quite a lot. As I said, so with the class lines, they've always been blurred, in my opinion, to some extent. But if we consider class in terms of Marx, the most simplest way to define it. So we've got obviously those who own the means of production and those who are exploited for their labour and to fuel these capitalist classes. So I think when we keep it that simple, it's easier to understand. But there's obviously various issues in today's world where there are people who are doing like online sales, and also with the introduction of the petty bourgeoisie, who are the middle classes, for example, who would have been known and in the past they developed as a product of obviously capitalism, where they found more expendable income and were able to capitalise on this through their professions. So this is where, for me, where the class lines become blurred. It's more the middle classes, but I think even then it's too simplistic a term. Because if you look at the 18th and 19th centuries, and I've just covered this in like some of my other research, the middle classes sort of began taking ownership of things because of their expendable income through this new capital they've had. And industries like the pharmaceutical companies, the pharmaceutical industry, the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, even the education system, it was all monopolised on by these sort of middle class groups. And they were able to obviously separate themselves. And for some point, it's kind of like talking about power and stuff. So it's kind of like Gramsci, we talk about the hegemony and stuff like that, and sort of the ruling ideas. But to me, a lot of people don't see the middle classes as a kind of, see them as an ally to the working class. But I think that's too simplistic again, because if we, for instance, take a doctor, for example, doctor, you have the doctor who owns his surgery, and he's charging people, rich people, as part of his surgery as well. Whereas as that doctor, as his profession, he doesn't need to attend to poor people because ultimately they're not going to pay him for it. So obviously, I think these people are scabs anyway for looking after the rich and leaving the working person to look after themselves. But I think there's a total difference even between the sort of profession of doctors rather than just class itself. Because if you've got a doctor who's working for the NHS and putting all their time into that and looking after the people as well, I think you can see there the difference of just one profession rather than a whole class of people. But I think doctors probably the best example of how the middle class is split. In terms of jump up classes, the idea that somebody makes enough money that they somehow become middle class, like if you've got somebody who works in the oil rigs, for example, who's working class all their days, done scaffolding, for instance, offshore, the scaffolding, they go and make quite good money to come back and they're able to buy nice things, and that doesn't mean they've jumped up class. You know, they're still working class, they're still working for the money. They don't own the means of production. They also, in that sense, are they're still confined to this sort of notion of working class culture because they've still got the same slang, the way they talk, they've still got the same attitudes, they've still got the same dress and stuff like that. They might dress up a wee bit nicer and have more fancier clothes and stuff like that, but they're still alienated for this sort of middle class society because it's a difficult bar to break in. And I hear this quite a lot for a lot of working class academics who really struggle to break into the world of academia itself and getting high end university jobs as lecturers and things like that. Even though they've got all the qualifications, it's more about who you know rather than what you know. So I feel that so long as this idea, the ownership and the people who work under it exist, then I think that keeps it better for analysis. But in terms of sort of real world and the smaller, more intricate instances, there's loads of different ways you can look at it, especially in the modern world where anybody can sell it and anybody can do anything really. And you'd be a business owner, but be a skint business owner as well. So you could be on pennies as well. It's not like the old times when if you had a business, you were usually bringing in a lot of money or you already had a lot of money behind you. It's that an evolved world, I think. So it's quite blurred, but I think for the most part, it still remains true with the who owns the means of production and who's exploited for labour.
Do you believe in when you're born, you're born into a certain class? If we had to use the class system, that you are born working class, middle class.
Well, I mean, I would say that there's no avoiding that. If you're born into a working class family, it doesn't matter what they do. You could send your kid to a middle class school if you're working class, and even then they're going to stand out like so firm. Just again, just with the way they speak, and just with the parents as well. There's going to be certain stigmas surrounding you. So I feel that we are working class are were alienated in various aspects, and so I think if you're born into a working class family, you're working class. If you're born into a middle class family, you're middle class. There's no escaping that. It's not the children's faults, obviously. In terms of if you're middle class, you're upper class, and things like that. I think for me, it's all about what you do as an individual. So if you're it's all about the struggles you choose to fight for. Because a good example of who would be middle class, obviously, Che Guevara came from a middle class background, he's a doctor as well. And obviously, he chose the correct side to fight for. Fought for the liberation of the working class and the exploited and the poor against these sort of tyrants in Cuba before they obviously had the revolution. So I think that you might be born into a certain class, but you don't necessarily need to remain in that class. But I would say it is a lot easier for a middle class person to start fighting for a working class struggle rather than it is a working class person trying to get involved in a middle class life.
How does socialism fit into the 21st century?
Well, I mean, as I've been saying, there's so long as capitalism exists, there's a place for socialism. Ultimately, so long as there's inequality, there's a place for it. So long as there's children going hungry, or people are being underpaid for their work, struggling with their rent, or homeless, so long as wars are started to fuel capitalism, then there's a place for socialism, and can, and in my opinion, should exist.
In terms of the political spectrum, it's often referred to in terms of right and left, left and right. Would you consider yourself as far left, or is the political spectrum in that sense not something you like to define yourself by?
I reject notions of left and right when it comes to socialism, purely on the basis that socialism's not about left and right, it's about the working class, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie. Ultimately, if you can't have a united working class if we're arguing or left and right. So obviously a lot of what we consider right wing is the working class people who champion Tory ideas, or they champion sort of fascist ideas. But that puts across the idea that these are working class ideas, but they're not working class ideas. There's the right wing is the tradition. It's that which exists to uphold and maintain everything that exists already. So really, that's the ideas of the ruling classes, the right. So I reject the idea of left and right on that basis, purely because if we want socialism, it shouldn't be like that. It should be working class versus the upper classes. But as I say, the latter is basically where the right comes from. It's just that working class sometimes arguing their ideas, but not enough emphasis is placed on where the ideas come from. So we start looking left and right rather than looking up at our problems.
Does it then hamper your cause that socialism is often tarred with the lefty brush? Like the loony left is what socialism is, often portrayed by people who find themselves politically on the right.
I mean, this is an issue that's been happened quite a lot lately, and I think it's to do with the sort of the power of right wing media, because for every great socialist minded person out there, there's the right will publish and print and post about like one left, one lefty, um, and we're associated with that often as socialists, because people that really make a distinction between being a liberal leftist or a socialist or a communist or a communist party, socialist party, or sort of liberal left or anarchist. To them, everybody's just a lefty, even though we've got probably the biggest issue that the left's ever faced is the infighting and the left-tarianism that we've got. But certainly there's a lot of crazy lefties who are actually not really left. Well, maybe they are left, but they don't represent socialism in any single way. But the way that the most funded media can put it out there, as I say, the right wing media, they've got the best backing. They can create any propaganda they want. So if they want to make out that every leftist is a loony left, that they can do that, because we've not got much challenge in it right now, and that's something that we need to combat ourselves.
I think that was successfully played out in terms of Jeremy Corbyn. Like the way he was portrayed, he was hounded really when you think about the treatment he had, just the way that journalists, even at the BBC, the way that he was treated in the media at large would suggest that him having any semblance of socialist ideas, there's no space for him. The right wing media would decide we're not having that, and he was then ushered disgracefully off the stage. How did you view his time as the Labour leader?
Well, I mean, I loved Corbyn. He wasn't perfect, obviously, but I felt that a lot of what he was championing was amazing. And the fact that he could come out and say it. My only issue with Corbyn was that he never went far enough. He was trying to play too many sides at once, rather than just coming out and saying, look, I'm for this, I'm for that. was trying to hold back in a couple of things, and I think that's what cost him. But as you say, that totally is a perfect example of my point regarding how the British right media, and not just Britain but America as well, because I feel that Britain has been sort of poisoned by these Americanisms as well, and they control the media because we do live in a sort of global society in a sense, especially when it comes to sort of media and social media. If they want to put a stain across any person's name, they can do that, and sort of these global backers as well who fund them. And you just need to look at some of the people out there, don't know, who've got such big right wing sort of media channels that I don't know if that Milo's cutting about, but that Watson guy, Ben Shapiro, these guys are all completely sort of right wing moguls, but they're getting all this backing and funding and support, and we don't really have an answer to it now because we've not got enough backing, we've not got the money to actually combat their media presence.
Do you think if you did have the money to combat their presence, that socialism in any form would be electable at the ballot box?
Just depends. I mean, it depends if it's put across. Ultimately, when we consider socialism, the problem we've got with socialism in this country is there's no agreed way in how socialism should really happen. Obviously, if democratic socialism, it's not actually ultimate socialism itself. Again, that's a kind of diluted form. People fear here the idea that there should be a complete socialist government because of this ingrained idea that we will be fighting our democracy. Actually, we don't live in a democracy. You know, we live in we pick the best for the worst. Well, we pick the best out of the options that we're given, which are always the worst options anyway. So democracy is already a facade and a sham. As you say, that's why Corbyn never got elected, because they just were never going to allow that to happen. But the fact that he got that far shows you that maybe we did make some progress, but now we've fell back away. But in terms of through the ballot box, I don't see it feasible for a ballot box purely on the basis that we've already seen what happens. We've got all this media. If we had the money, if we had the backing, if there was like rich billionaire funders and stuff like that to back it, then definitely. I think because a great example is, I mean, all you need to look at is the metro in the mornings. You get the metro and the bus, and you get the metro and the train. Pure propaganda and that, pure right wing. It's owned by the Daily Mail, and people are reading that every morning. And you're talking about socialisation and talking about people getting, as I was talking about Gramsci earlier, the sort of the intellectual salespersons who's in charge of these ideas. I mean, the ruling classes are still the main champions of the ruling ideas, and they can get crossing things like the metro, and people are just reading that in the morning, not thinking anything of it, thinking it's just an impartial paper because it's on your train or your bus. I mean, that in itself, the fact they can get that for free just shows the difference. And then you've got, as I say, all these social media channels. I don't think the left will ever have that kind of money to print, but right know what they're doing, and they know they're getting away with it. So I don't know the answer, sadly.
In terms of the society that you would like to see, do you think it's more achievable within an independent Scotland or within a larger United Kingdom?
I don't honestly feel socialism's more achievable or less achievable but by gaining independence. Purely because I think independence is important in the sense that Britain needs to be broken. People that we can achieve something radical. Because until now, all we've really seen is general strikes in the 20s, the 30s, a period in the 70s where we were hugely successful through trade union movements. But that really is, for Britain, is radical as we've had it. And I know it sounds like kind of cliche, but I think we have been a little bit too British in our approach to how we achieve this. So ultimately, we've been too courteous and too nice, I think, about going about trying to change things. But my worry with independence is with neoliberals in charge, or these Scottish Tories or Scottish Conservatives who exist. I mean, the prime example for me is Ireland. What James Connolly says, it doesn't really matter who's leading independence. If it's capitalist classes, it doesn't matter if you're independent or no, because ultimately, if it doesn't matter what flag you fly, if it's capitalism, it's still the same, still capitalism, just with a different flag on it. Just a different same brand for exploitation. So I think the most realistic way to socialism, and this is why I don't think independence makes that much a difference, unless obviously we do lead with socialist principles, is that we need to lead socialism for grassroots level. We need to have it amongst unions. We need to be uniting on issues through our communities. As I say, trade unions, tenants unions, and then building class consciousness for the bottom, grassroots up. Because as I said, ultimately, if we've got a Scottish independence, or we've got sort of like British loyalism and that stuff. I mean, to me, all we're ever going to accomplish with that is people are just arguing over our capitalists are better capitalists than yours. Scottish capitalists are better than British capitalists. Because that's what it really is. I think so long as the independence campaign has been led by neoliberals and Scottish Tories. I know Scottish Tories is a party, but I'm talking about the ruling classes within Scotland, the landlord classes, the ownerage classes, the lords and the lairds, the ones who sold place to the union. So I think as long as they exist, then it's irrelevant anyway. We really need to be building a working class movement rather than relying on sort of independence and hopes and dreams. But as I say, on the other side of that, I do feel that independence might spark something larger, in sense that we can see something radical happening and prove that radicalism can happen in this nation. Because, as I say, until now, probably the biggest thing we've seen was Brexit. The most radical thing I think the country's faced in the last, probably since the war. I think there's anything else that's been that much a shock in this country. Aye. Does that answer the question now? No.
Yeah. But in the absence of any widespread socialist representation within politics, who stroke what are the next best thing at the moment? Are there any mainstream parties that you can identify with in any way at all?
No mainstream parties. No. There's certain elements of probably a few parties that I like, but there's nothing next best thing. Honestly, I don't care about SNP, Greens, and I used to have like I've got kind of a soft spot for Labour, but that's pure romanticised rubbish because ultimately they've sold out. Each of these parties, SNP, Greens, and Labour, they've all got some really good socialist-minded people within them. Just the parties in general are still run by these sort of bourgeois people. That's why they've always been narrated.
I think that's just a microcosm of society in general, though. That's a snapshot of the world at large.
Well, that's it. I mean, but the thing is, with Labour itself, I mean, Labour is called Labour because it's based on Labour. It's supposed to be representing the working class. It's the one party that is supposed to represent us at the times like Keir Hardie and stuff like that, and it's so far removed from what it used to be. And I still can't get my head around the fact that there's no mainstream party that's purely for the working class, not one, because all of them are trying to appease their funders. That's the middle classes and upper classes, and so long as that happens, they're able to control narrative, and as long as they control narrative, then it's never going to be about the workers. And that's what frustrates me, and that's why I think that it could only ever come anything positive for us as workers, could only ever come from grassroots movements, trade unions, or offset parties, like Communist parties, Socialist parties, and just from there. But the problem is with these parties is they're quite attached to certain communities as well. So just this is part of the problem, I feel. Just need one single working class party. That's it. But last one.
For example, in the Scottish election that's just gone, so obviously there's the two ballot papers. You get your constituency one and your list one. On the constituency one, where I live in the East End, there were only four parties. There was SNP, Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem. If you had that ballot sheet in front of you, would you vote or would you not bother?
My issue would have probably been, do I want the Tories to get in? Are they going to have power? If I thought for a second the Tories were going to win that constituency, I would have voted for the people who was the most to get them out.
Yeah.
But generally, I tend just not to touch any of the parties. I really don't like to have my name down voting for parties that I don't believe in. And I know that sounds daft because I don't really care if it sounds daft anyway, but I don't believe in voting for a party that doesn't represent me, and I don't believe in purely because it's to stop another party. I mean, that's other people can vote what they want, but I'm not going to put my name against a party that I don't feel represent me. I mean, that's the whole point of voting, isn't it? And
so unless it was to stop the Tories, then you wouldn't put your name against a party unless it was to stop Tories. That right?
well, it depends. I mean, when Corbyn was in, I voted for Corbyn, but in terms of what were presented with the new, probably no.
That was the example I used because the constituency one was very limited, but then you get the party list one that was like a toilet roll, and that had all the parties on it. So I'd imagine the Scottish Socialist Party would have been. They were on that list. I think I remember seeing them. So you will have got your chance elsewhere, but then when your options are limited like that, there's no point really because nothing there is what represents you remotely.
Well, that's usually my mindset. I just can't. I really hate. I honestly hate the bourgeois people and the people funding their parties. I mean, see, the thing is, see, with SNP, there was a wee period I was thinking, look, I might come round to these, and then I just need to look at their number two, that Ian Blackford, whatever his name is.
The guy, the Westminster guy.
He's a European banker, multiple landowner. I mean, he's worth millions, and he's supposed to be speaking for me in Scotland doing England. What? You know what I mean? How can these people pretend to know anything about what we're going through in our life? That's, to me, it's just ridiculous, and that's why I can't vote for these people so long as they're. I mean, don't get wrong, as I say, there's some people within the SNP, they're good people, socialists. There's some people within Labour who are great socialists. And then you've got Greens, some of the people are good as well. My only issue is with some of the main parties is we've got a real lot of societal issues, really bad ones right now. And I feel that they tend to play to the masses rather than try to address the situation, rather try to address the issues and try to fix them because they fear it might lose votes on either side. What they do is they play to partisan crowds, they try to encourage partisan voting. Everything they're done is done with an agenda and a back thought of, are we going to lose something by doing this? Are we going to gain something for doing it? Rather than just doing it. And that's my big issue because that's where I differ as a socialist. Socialists do stuff is the right thing to do because you're doing it, because it's the best way that works, and not because you're needing to pander to people or needing to keep everybody happy. It's not about that. It's doing what's right and doing what's best for society at large. So that's just what annoys me about the mainstream parties.
But then is there not a danger that if a Scottish Socialist Party got into power, they would then do the exact same thing? That they would make decisions to protect their winning place in an election?
I would think they probably might, but this is the problem with the current system. The only thing is, the Scottish Socialist Party come into power and they're doing things to protect their party and protect their position in power. Scottish Socialist Party are funded by workers, totally. They're run by workers, and they're represented by workers. For the most part, there is some snobs in Scottish Socialist Party as well. But they're snobs, I think, on the right side of things rather than using it as sort of political careerism. But there probably is some people all about careerism within pretty much every party, SSP and biased. I'm really at a sort of crossroads in, well, not crossroads in politics. I'm really at a really frustrated point in politics right now where I just feel like banging my head against the wall because I feel as if there's nothing that represents the people, truly represents the people, which is part of the problem.
I think I would say, like, for me, for the first time in my electoral life now, I would say I'm very much politically homeless. But I think, yeah, I look at all the parties and I'm a wee bit underwhelmed, I just think, by everything.
This is it. This is my point. Who is? Well, I get a lot of snobbery online, and it pisses me off. There's all these people like Extinction Rebellion. They're doing some good work and stuff like that. But there's also this element of this snobbery over certain working class groups, and I think of myself. I always try to put myself in my position before I was politically minded. When I was in the schemes and I had no clue about politics and I wasn't involved in any way, and I didn't even know what a class system was. And I always try to think to myself, who out there is actually representing them, who are struggling to put a meal on their table for their wains and stuff like that, struggling to send their wains to school with food in their belly. Who out there is representing these people? And I don't see a single party. And this even goes for some of the smaller parties as well, because some of the smaller parties are still only interested in trying to get votes and membership. They're not really we've got the lumpen proletariat, which I was. Who's appealing to them? Who's trying to get them involved? Who's trying to change them? There's too many people in certain parties who are scared to actually get their hands dirty and go into certain schemes and groups and start saying to people, look, start coming out and get involved, tap doors and get people motivated. They'll do it at voting times, they'll know day to day. And to me, this is part of the issue that we face because we're stuck with these sort of mainstream parties and then we're relying on the smaller parties who a lot of the reason why they're probably not being able to go and do as much as they'd like is also because of the shortage of manpower as well. They've not got the bodies to go and do these things and all these things I imagine they'd probably like to do. I just feel that I always like to look grassroots up, as I say, and so long as there's nobody representing these grassroots groups, apart from your unions like living rent, tenants unions, who are actually going out doing stuff for people. Tenants unions are perfect because everybody's got a house. Well, majority of people have got a house. The homeless obviously can't get them involved in much because they've not got anything to be able to use for them. They're struggling to get by day to day, so we kind of need to fight for them as well. But the people who have got houses, tenants unions are the best way to address that. That's usually addressing the sort of lumpen proletariat aspect as well and bringing people into the fold and educating them through communities and stuff like that. And I think that's, as I say, I always feel that grassroots work is going to be the way forward if we are able to achieve it. And if we're not, then I think it will be because we've not done that enough.
To round off then, firstly, where would you like to be? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Finish this PhD and going on doing postdoctoral research, but also using my position to try and help people, because part of the whole researching is I believe is using the position I can get to and using my research to try and help people. Otherwise, what's the point? I just feel like I'd have done all this hard work for nothing if it's not helping anybody else. I'm not doing this to. Obviously, it's nice to try and have a wee bit of money coming in, but again, see if I've got enough to live on and enough to help people. It's not really. Not sounds like a pure cheesy cliche sort of thing, but try and do my best to try and help people who have not got any help for themselves. Nobody's representing them because, as I say, I've been there. I watched my ma who's on her arse with alcoholism, stepdad who's a drug addict, my family, my other family, my pals and stuff like that as well. And nobody speak for these people. So I feel that 5 years' time, if I could be anywhere, it would be in a position within the communities, working alongside communities and helping people and using my position through academia as well, through research and putting pressure on government, things like that, to try and make some necessary changes. That's what I'd like to see myself.
My last question is, you've got a podcast coming up. Tell me a little bit about that.
So called Working Class History and Theory. So the idea is basically just to educate some people who are, firstly, don't have the means to be able to sit and read literature. So as I was saying, for reading Marx, if you're not interested in Marx, or maybe you've got interest in Marx, try to read Marx, you pick it up, you read the first few lines and you're like, what the hell is this? What's some of the words they're talking about? So it's going to be basically try to bring people in to the struggle through education, and that means, and then also history. So I'll give an example. The first podcast I've got lined up is going to be based around sort of tenants' rights and tenants' unions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the history of sort of like rent strikes and the Mary Barber and stuff like that. So it's going to be a wee bit of history telling you about Mary Barber, the rent strikes in Govan in the south side. And then we're going to talk about the sort of theories behind these rent strikes and how we can apply them. And then we're going to bring on a guest and maybe talk about living rent, who are doing the same sort of ideas today. And basically what it's all about is getting a bit of history, a bit of education, then applying some theory to it and showing why and how they done it, and then talk about it in real time terms, like today's terms, just to give people sort of material basis for their thinking, and so they can look at it and go, well, actually, I see what they're doing now, and maybe I'd like to get involved in that. Just about educating and try to get people involved in certain ways that make a struggle a wee bit more appealing. Because as I say, we don't have these right wing channels where we can just sort of like mass publish propaganda, basically lies to people. I'd rather educate people and give them the truth, and that way they'll be more involved if they know and they see it firsthand.
Truth sets you free. That's the best way to inform people as well.
But exactly. I always try to tell people, like, the right wing will feed you lies and propaganda, but the left, I'm working class. I'm not here to trick people to get them involved. I'm here to get them involved because I want change for myself and I want change for them. At the end of the day, it improves all our lives if we're all working together.
When can we expect to hear that podcast?
Well, the plan was about a week ago. I'm just trying to get sort the space because I had to get an extension to finish that dissertation. I just finished for the masters. It was about a week extension I got on the end of it because I've had loads of shit to handle. So, but probably a couple of weeks. We're going to try and get it done before October anyway. That's going to be the aim.
Good. When it comes out, I'll be sure to give it a retweet because it sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to it. Where can people find you on social media so they can catch up with your tweets and it will keep them engaged about when your podcast is going to be coming?
Well, the working class theory and history one, the tagline is, it's just working class HI 1. So working class high 1 is in working class. And then my own one is just Gavin _F_Brewis.
GFB, is that your DJ name as well?
GFB? No, that's MC name. Used to DJ. B.
But no, that's me. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this. It was really good.
Thanks for listening to us rambling on.
No, that's what you were here for. That was the idea. Because I thought you're
sorted, mate.
See you soon, right? You as well. Bye bye. And there you have it. Big thanks to this week's guest Gavin for his time. Gavin's Twitter handle is included in the show notes. Usual bits and pieces from me to see you out. The best way to keep up to date with future episodes of Lost for Words is to follow using the handle @LostForWordsPod on Twitter, Instagram or both. To support the show, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and if you're an Apple user, a 5-star review would be fantastic. If you like what you hear, even consider telling someone, because that helps us to grow as well. But that's all from me for this week. I am your host Jason, and this has been Socialism with Gavin Brewis. I hope to see you next time for another episode of the Lost for Words podcast.